Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs and today's class, which is How We Got the Bible, number 5? 6? Hold on. I've got it here. Number 7. No, number 6. I'm incorrect. I just read the number 5 and said, oh, it's the one after. It's number 7. Class number 6. Last time we talked about prophets. This time, if I do this, look at that. Wonderful. We're talking about Psalms this time. As you go throughout the Old Testament, again, we started in Genesis 1, which is narratives, and then we move on. What's the next major genre you hit across? Probably law. What's the next major genre that you hit across? Well, you have Joshua and Judges, but those are just history. You have Samuel and Kings, and those are also just history, but interspersed in there, you have the introduction of these prophetic guys, and the rules of the prophets kind of rule part of what Moses says, but more and more some vague historical characters that show up in Kings and Chronicles, as well as some of the later books that are technically in our English Bibles. They're positioned after the wisdom literature, but in this case, I talked about prophets first because I felt like it. Here we are in the wisdom literature, and today we have the Psalms. Now, Psalms are interesting. If there's any one of these genres that probably won't fill a whole session, it's presumably Psalms. At the same time, I'm really good at talking a lot about things, so I don't know that this will be shorter than average, but if there's any section that would be shorter than average, it would be the Psalms. Psalms are, in a broad sense, you have this section of the Bible called wisdom literature, and the idea of wisdom literature is it's basically educational information that teaches you how to live your life well, not just righteously, but also just like having a good life and having a worthwhile life and doing something that actually matters and living intelligently. Essentially, is what wisdom literature does. Psalms do that. They're a little bit more theological than that, sure, but they also do that. So they're a part of wisdom literature, but they're not quite the same. One of the things we'll talk about next time when we talk about the rest of wisdom literature being considered Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. It's usually those 5, at least in the English categorization. When you think about wisdom literature, those are all very different books. Proverbs is very practical life advice, whereas Ecclesiastes is kind of like having an existential breakdown, and Song of Solomon is a very classy love song, but also in many ways it's not classy at all. So you have those are very different, and then Job is like this meditation on who God is and if God really cares if people are good and what does that mean? What does that benefit you? I mean, these are all very different kinds of books, and Psalms is also one of them. Psalms being a collection of individual psalms. A psalm is just a hymn, basically. It's a song of some sort, but the book of Psalms being a collection of 150 different individual songs is it's different. I mean, even among the rest of the wisdom literature, Psalms kind of stands out as this individual thing. It's a whole beast of its own. You can read the wisdom literature or you can read Psalms, and it's just a little bit different. So we're going to talk about it today. There are some specific rules to go through when you're actually thinking about Psalms, because again, these are songs, and if you read a song like you do a history book, you've probably messed something up. But we'll get there when we get there. First thing you need to know about Psalms is that they are unique. They are unique in a variety of different ways, and we'll go through some of those here. The first thing you would notice is their dual purpose. Psalms are, in many ways, both prayers and hymns. They are songs to be sung. Many of the Psalms have titles above them. The book I'm basing this class on the outline of it, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. For some reason, there's a line in there that says the psalm titles are added in and they're not original to the text. To all of my knowledge that I've ever read, other than this book, they are original to the text. So I have no idea where that comes from. But what you'll see in a lot of the psalm titles, in an English Bible, you'll typically have, it'll say Psalm number 1, and then it'll give this English heading of, something that we think like a summarization of the chapter. You'll see this over all sorts of different chapters in the Bible, or over all sorts of different paragraphs in the Bible, human added kind of insertions to say, hey, this is generally what this is talking about. If you ever run across a passage that says the parable of the sower, that's what I'm talking about. Jesus never says, this is the parable of the sower. Boom, here it is. that title is supplemented on by human beings. Psalms are not that way. Psalms actually have titles that were written into the original text because psalms are just a collection of songs. What was the background for the song? How do I play it? What melody goes with it? We have the words, but we don't have the music for it. What do I play it with? What kind of instrument goes with it? Or does an instrument go with it? These are all questions that you have about songs. Those are kind of written in. And so in a lot of different psalm introductions, you'll see a line that says, for the choir director, arranged according to whatever, or this is a lament, or this is a happy song. This is meant to be played with a specific kind of instrument versus this other one is no instruments at all, just to be sung. It's a song of ascents or whatever it is. And so you'll see different titles that do indicate that these are very specifically songs for a lot of them. You also see that these are basically prayers. The line between a song and a prayer is oftentimes very, very blurry. In modern America, what I've grown up with is it's very distinct when something is a prayer and when something is a song. But in the olden days, it really wasn't. It doesn't feel like it, because you can take any of the Psalms and they are prayers. You could also sing them, but they are prayers. In many ways, if you took a modern-day hymn book, you could pray the lyrics of a lot of those songs. We don't do it. We don't really think like that because, a songbook is a songbook and it's just for songs. But actually, psalms are hymns and psalms are prayers, both in one. It's not one or the other. And if you read it as only a prayer or only a hymn, you've missed a major facet of how a psalm can be used and what it was typically used for. Another unique thing about Psalms is that they are not from God, but they are inspired. How does that even work? Well, I'm not exactly sure. That's a whole question about inspiration that we'll have to talk about at a different time later. Psalms are written from humans. They're by humans. They're written from the human perspective. And it's not like God is necessarily coming down and putting those words in people's mouths. But they are still inspired. They're included in the inspired writings. And I don't know exactly how the interaction works, but God has allowed people to experience things and then accepts how these people are framing their experiences and how they're talking about them and how they're using them. They're using these experiences to teach themselves, to remind themselves of truth, to praise and honor God, to confess their anger to him and their sin to him and let him take that away from them. They're using these things righteously, but it is human generated. So it's a little bit different. When I say Psalms is unique, I mean, even among wisdom literature like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, it's still unique. It's not from God, but it is inspired. Psalms are really, they're just a collection of insights into God and man. They're not commands, and that's really important, and we'll hit that point several times over from different perspectives as we go through this. Psalms are not commands from God that you would do these things, you have to do these things. Psalms are insights. They allow you to know who God is or to see who God is. They allow you to see yourself and to find out where you're at as well. Psalms are like this way of thinking about ourselves and of God to get a more realistic and a more objective point of view on who God is and all of those things. Psalms are pretty unique, and it also goes along right with it that these are poetry. Psalms is one of if not the only book that is poetry. Lamentations, you could argue Lamentations is all poetry. At the same time, Lamentations is just basically a long psalm, so, do with that what you will, right? There's a massive component in it. But Psalms are, back and forth, they are just poetry, is what people are saying, which means poetry naturally has some limitations to it. So we'll talk about some of those a little bit later on, but if you keep that in mind, Psalms are unique because it is just poetry. You open the book of Psalms, you're not going to find something that's not poetic. That can be good and that can be bad. That has positives and negatives. It has benefits and drawbacks, but it is true. So keep it in mind. It helps these Psalms stand out from the rest of the crowd. That's about how unique Psalms is. As you move forward, think about that idea of poetry, right? Pick up on that idea and you start to realize, hey, Psalms are meant to be paired with music, most of them. Again, for a lot of the titles of the Psalms, it'll say like for the chief musician, or it'll tell you what style, or it'll tell you what instrument. When you're reading Psalms, if you forget that these are supposed to be paired with music, you are going to miss a lot of the vibe. Is a horribly overused word today, where people seem to use it without giving much thought to what it means, or maybe it just doesn't mean anything anymore. But I hope you understand what I mean when I say Psalms are meant to have a particular vibe more than anything. The things that are expressed, especially in poetry, is not. I mean, yeah, you have to ask the question: is poetry true? And the answer is, it depends, right? What do you mean by true? What do you mean by poetry? Like, what exactly do you mean by that? Because there are a few different answers you can come up with. I would personally say, on a technical level, poetry is generally not true, because poetry is using expressive language to speak about a heightened sense of what is real, like a heightened sense of reality. It's not really meant to be true. It's not meant to be literal. If I take poetry literally, I've completely misunderstood it. And no poet would want you to take his work literally, because if you take it literally, you've missed the point of it being poetry. Poetry is by nature, it doesn't deal with like the exact thing that happened. It deals with the emotions behind it. It deals with the kind of ideas behind it, and it's trying to gather things up on a broader scope or on a more emotional level. It's using language not so much because the language is technically accurate, but it's using language to try and make you feel something. That's what music is for. If there is a movie scene that's supposed to be scary, but you take the music out, how scary is it? If there's a music scene that's supposed to be scary, but you replace the scary music with funny music, it's suddenly not scary anymore. If there's a movie scene that's supposed to be serious, but you replace the serious music with something else, then suddenly it's not serious anymore, because music has this kind of effect on us. It taps into our emotions and does something inside of us that can't necessarily be quantified. It's just different. When you think about Psalms are supposed to be paired with music. It's not saying, hey, this is the most literal thing. It's not saying, hey, these are the most strictly accurate words that could have ever been used. What Psalms are doing is they're pairing with music. They're trying to get inside your head, not necessarily from a strictly technically literal standpoint, but from an idea. It's trying to impact your emotions and make you feel something. And that's a little bit different. Be careful when you actually read Psalms. I may have said something about it further down here. It's targeted towards emotion. These are hymns. That's where it is. These are mood setters. These are not logical arguments. Someone will say something like, it's very much like one of our modern day songs, right? If you read a modern day song, if you read the lyrics to a breakup song, it's probably not actually literal, but they're meant to express something. They're meant to make you feel something. When you listen to that, even though you know that's not actually what happened, you feel like it is, right? That's the kind of thing we're talking about. If you read a psalm like Psalm 51, Psalm 51 has a very funny line in it that says, in sin did my mother conceive me. And Catholics and various other groups who will grab onto the idea of original sin and that human beings are always sinful or born sinful, and then we need baptism even when we're children to remove the sin or whatever it is. They don't even baptize right, because baptism is immersion, but that's a whole different issue. People who grab onto that one line in Psalm 51, I think it's verse 4, are kind of ignoring the fact that this is a song that's happening. You don't read a song lyric and say, in sin did my mother conceive me. Oh, it must have been a sin to do the conception thing, and then it must have been a sin for the baby to be born, and then for the child, then they inherit the sin, right? Boom, theology. If you get your theology from poetic overstatements that are meant to make you feel something, you're not doing good theology. And you need to really fix whatever you've got that's going on that's wrong there. The sense of Psalm 51 in verse, I think it's 4, it's either 3 or 4, and somewhere in there, is not David saying, wow, conception is a sin, and then babies inherit that sin, and then they are sinful human beings who need justification at the moment that they are born because they're sinful human beings. Psalm 51 is David saying, wow, I feel awful. That's it. Like, that's the whole thing. I feel terrible. I've never felt this bad. This is the worst day of my life. How many times have you said that? And how many times has it been true? Because if you've said it more than once, then you've lied at least one of those times. It's not the worst day of your life, right? Overstatement is a thing. Hyperbole is a thing, especially in poetry. And then people take poetry and try to make it very, very strictly literal instead of paying attention to what it actually is, which is poetic and overstatement and meant to make you feel things. If you over-literalize the Psalms, if you overthink the Psalms in many ways, you're going to miss out on what the point of the Psalms is, which is they make you feel something, and then they pull those feelings back around and they redirect it towards God. Be careful when you read poetry that you're not reading it like history. I mean, it sounds really obvious, and it is really obvious, but then you'll run into people who over-literalize stuff like Psalm 51 and use it to make a theological point in which is not being made there at all. Much better to make a point like that from even like Jeremiah's argument, even though Jeremiah's argument is also kind of in the form of the Jeremiah when he says, I wish my mother would have killed me when I was in the womb, is also in the form of poetic overstatement to make a point, and it's very obvious when you read, I think it's Jeremiah 20 that happens in, but I could be wrong on that chapter. Just read normally. If you read a book of poems, you're not reading them to be very, very literal. Godfrey Gordon Gustavus Gore did not exist, and you don't read that like a normal story. Go and read that, like that poem. It's not a traditional story. The Charge of the Light Brigade is not literally how it all happened. It has some elements of truth to it, sure, but they are framed within poetry to make you feel something rather than to be literally true in every statement. Then don't come to one of the Psalms and say, well, but this one's literally true. If you're saying that, you don't understand poetry or music or Psalms in general. Be careful with that. And don't overstep. Poetry is unique. It is meant to be metaphorical. It's not meant to be literal. And if we treat it as literal, we're going to go down some very wrong paths. Now, Psalms themselves, as you think about Psalms, they are poetry. They are Hebrew poetry. Hebrew poetry comes with its own kind of sets of quirks, I guess you could say, oddities. There's some things that do make sense, that catch on to us and work with our minds, and there's some things that just don't really make sense to our minds, but it's how they did it, and so we'll continue down that path. Psalms is literature being a different way you can look at Psalms. When you're reading like the book of Psalms, as it were, the book of Psalms, as in the book of Psalms that's in the Bible, it's 150 Psalms, but it's actually 5 different books of Psalms. We say we have 39 books in the Old Testament, but that's because we count Psalms as 1 book instead of 5, and we count the minor prophets as 12 books instead of 1, and we count 1st and 2nd Samuel as 2 books instead of 1, and stuff like that. Psalms as literature are also kind of confusing because there are a bunch of different things that you should be thinking about as you think through, like, how do you even like categorize and organize these things? First thing you should point out is there's different types. Joy psalms, there are psalms about joy and where everything's good. There are also psalms about sorrow where everything's bad. We often call them stuff like Lamentations. Even if you go and read the book of Lamentations, it's just, like I said earlier, it's just a long psalm. It's someone who is lamenting, someone who is sorrowful, and he's expressing that in overstatement and a poetic way, but he is expressing that to God. There are all sorts of different types of psalms that you have. You have all sorts of different forms of psalms within that. A type of psalm would be like, this is a happy psalm, or this is a sad psalm, or this is a psalm for when I'm angry. A form of a psalm is trying to kind of differentiate that even further. What type of psalm do you sing when you're joyous? Well, you can sing a straight praise psalm, which is, God is amazing. You can sing a thanksgiving psalm, which is, God has done so much for me and I am grateful for it. You can sing a rejoicing psalm, which is just like, look at the world, it's so cool, God's great. That's it. Like, it's kind of a praise psalm, but it's not exactly, because it's not, we praise you for doing these things. It's just, look at all these things. They're so cool. Also, God did it. That was pretty cool, too. When you think about, like, a happy psalm, you can have those different types. You can have a bunch of different types as well. It's just different forms of psalms then break down into different little categories. A psalm of lament could be sorrow. A psalm of, what's it called? What are they called? The vengeance psalms, or the imprecatory psalms, what people usually call as the vengeance psalms, the psalms where it's like, I want revenge. That's not a lament, but it's not a lament, if you know what I mean. They are sorrowful, right? An imprecatory psalm where you're wishing ill upon someone else because they've done evil to you. It is a psalm that's stemming from the idea of sorrow, just like a lament is stemming from sorrow. But often laments are, I wish this hadn't happened, whereas imprecatory psalms are, since this did happen, here's what I wish on them in return. And so that, it feels very different. They came from the same overall type, but they are different forms, and so you're going to read those kinds of psalms differently. There are also different functions for psalms that you need to think about. Some psalms are meant for temple worship. Some psalms are meant specifically, there's a section of the psalms called the Psalms of Ascent, which are I believe they're in the 120s and 130s, somewhere in there. They're basically praise psalms, but they're specifically meant to be sung around the time of Passover, when it says that Jesus and his disciples sung a hymn before going out to the Mount of Olives, or on the way to the Mount of Olives. It's probably one of those. They were probably singing one of the songs of ascent, because those are the Passover psalms, and you sing those for Passover. There are some psalms that are used in the temple. There are some psalms that are just personal. I don't believe that I don't think you had many people communally coming together to sing Psalm 51, which is, look how evil I am, and please forgive me personally. At the same time, there are several psalms that are broad forgiveness psalms, where the whole group kind of repents together, where you say, look, we have done evil as a country, we have done evil as a people, and we need your forgiveness. Those would be sung in the temple settings, or those would be sung in a large group somewhere, whereas individual songs about sin would be sung personally. And so these are different scenarios that you would find things sitting in. In the same way, some psalms are meant to be sung at weddings, and some psalms definitely don't fit at weddings. May they dash your children against the rock probably doesn't fit in a wedding ceremony. But at the same time, some of the wedding songs and those rejoicing things about new life happening probably don't fit at a funeral, and so you wouldn't sing them there either. There are different functions to the psalms, and when you read some of the psalms, you can get a sense of who might be singing this, in what situations they might be singing this. Like, how was this used? How did it inform the life of a person in Israel when they would read through this or sing through this? What were the circumstances in which this would actually come out there? These are also different units. You have to keep the context of individual psalms. If you're reading Psalm 51, read Psalm 51. Reading Psalm 52 does not really, it doesn't, well, I can't even say that. Psalm 52 is a different psalm. It's written by someone else. It's written at a different time. It's written in different circumstances. Those things are different. Keep the context of an individual psalm. If you are reading a psalm, it's good to read one psalm at a time and really focus on that, because that individual psalm displays a point in time where someone is thinking and someone's compiling this information together and gets it out on a page. That's a complete thought, is an individual psalm. If you just cut one verse out of context, like people do with Psalm 51, well, you're going to get yourself in trouble because you haven't kept the overarching context of the individual psalm. At the same time, you do need to remember that these are also different sets of things, and we need to be keeping blocks of psalms together. This is an interesting topic when you think about psalms as literary units. They're not contextual in the same way that Genesis is contextual. Genesis 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, I mean, there's a very clear context there, or Genesis later on, like 37 through the end of the book, when it's all about Joseph, right? That's a very specific context that you can read one story after the other and see how all these things are fitting together. Psalms don't exactly do that. And when you read 1 and then 2 and then 3. In a lot of ways, you're going 3 different directions in every individual psalm, and you're wondering, like, so there is no context to these. But at the same time, as you read the Psalms, if you read Psalm 1 and then read Psalm 2, if you ask yourself the question, why is Psalm 2 happening after Psalm 1? I don't know, but here's a theory. Psalm 1 is about a righteous man who dwells on God's things and wants to follow after God no matter what happens. Psalm 2 is about the evil leaders of the world who don't want to follow after God and do whatever they want to, but God crushes them. God does his own thing anyway. Well, maybe Psalm 1 is meant to teach us to be righteous and work to fit into God's plan, so that in Psalm 2 we're not the ones who get crushed. I'm not exactly sure. Right? I could probably think of 2 or 3 or 4 different reasons how you could draw some connective threads between different psalms, but they do inform each other. They can, and they do as well. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that psalms are, well, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. It's right here, I think. The idea of organizing psalms. When you think about psalms as individual pieces of art that are like stitched together, you have to wonder where that stitching comes from. Sorry, random people texting me because it's 5:45 p.m. Why am I recording something at 5:45? Also, stop interrupting me. In the nicest way possible. Thank you. When you think about organizing psalms, you have to think about, like, how did they fit together? Is there any overarching structure? When you read one of the history books, it's pretty easy. You can nail down, individual characters. Abraham is the main character from Genesis 12 to 24. And so the things in Genesis 12 through 24 are generally about Abraham. Sure, there's the Lot thing in like chapter 15 or 14, and there's the Lot thing in like chapter 19, but it's really about Abraham, and even Lot's story in many ways ties into and informs Abraham's story. For instance, in Genesis 18, Abraham is dealing with Sarah, and these 3 visitors come up, and he provides some food for them. They say, cool, Sarah's going to have a son. Sarah laughs at them. They say, why'd you laugh? She says, I didn't. And God says, well, now you're going to name your son Laughter because you're a dumb beaver who didn't believe. That's a heavily paraphrased reading. The conversation at the end of Genesis 18 is 2 of these beings walk away. 2 of these angels, they're called humans, walk away. And the Lord, the 3rd one, stays behind to talk to Abraham. And that's the situation where Abraham has that bargain with God, which is, hey, if there are, 50 righteous people in Sodom, don't kill it. And God says, okay. If there are 40 righteous people, don't kill it. Okay. What if there are like 10 righteous people? Fine, I won't kill it if there's 10 righteous people. And then there weren't 10 righteous people. And where do you find that out? You find it out in Genesis 19. Because the 2 angels who walked away from Abraham and God, when Abraham and God are looking after them, they watch the angels walk right into the city and go and get assaulted by the people of Sodom. And by the way, the sin of sodomy was homosexuality. It was not pedophilia, as many people try and claim because they're uncomfortable with the fact that God said male and female from the beginning, and yes, there are only 2, and yes, they should go with each other instead of going with their own. That's not how homosexuality is out. Don't do that. You have that picture in Genesis 19. And then what happens in Genesis 20? Abraham sees what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah, and he fears that God is going to destroy something similar closer to him. And so Abraham runs away to Egypt and lies about his wife. Genesis 19 isn't necessarily really about Sodom and Gomorrah. A lot of times, when you read Genesis 19, you can make a lot of application on how it's really about Abraham the whole time. That's the kind of context that you would have in a historical book. When you get into Psalms, you don't have that. Especially because every psalm is like way out of place. You start out with a psalm where nobody knows who wrote Psalm 1. And nobody knows who wrote Psalm 2 because there's not a title in it, although Peter does assign the words of Psalm 2 to David in Acts chapter 2, so it could be that is an official statement that God made on, like, yes, actually David did write Psalm 2, or it may just be that everybody kind of thought David wrote Psalm 2, and Peter's just like, yeah, you know how David wrote Psalm 2? And nobody actually knows who technically wrote Psalm 2, but, David was a great song guy, so yeah, we'll give it to him, that's fine. I don't actually know. I don't actually care. Psalm 1, we don't have a title for who wrote it. Psalm 2, maybe David. I'm not sure. Psalm 3, David. Psalm 4, I don't remember. Psalm 5, I think is David. But after that, like, who knows? There's some Psalms of Solomon, but then David will write Psalms after Solomon. Moses wrote a Psalm, but it's like Psalm 90, which is, if Moses wrote a Psalm, it should be Psalm 1. It's the first one that chronologically happened. Psalms is not chronological at all. These do not come in an orderly sequence of events. So how do they come? The Psalms are actually organized, I didn't click back over there, into 5 different books, which is kind of weird to think about. Psalms 1 through 41, Psalms 42 through 72, Psalms 73 through 89, Psalms 90 through 106, and Psalms 107 through 150. And by the way, if someone ever says, turn to Psalms chapter 1, that is a very frustrating pet peeve of mine because it's Psalm number 1. Thank you very much. It's not Psalms chapter 1. Anyway, I digress. The 5 books are curious because when you look at the books, it's not like you can look at it and say, oh, the theme of the first book is something definitive, and the theme of book number 2 is something else definitive, and 3 and 4 and 5. You can't really do that with the Psalms. There are some minor themes, maybe, but all of the Psalms are just kind of like mixed together in such a way that you can't make a definitive point on it. There is no definitive theme of the first 41 Psalms. But what's curious is when you read Psalm 1 and you read Psalm 41, in other words, you read the first and the last Psalm of each book, and you kind of get an interesting summary of, like, maybe some of what that book was about. Psalm 1 is, Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits on the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night, etc., etc. The wicked are not good, don't be like them. That's the warning. Chapter 41, the last psalm in the book. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in time of trouble. The Lord will preserve him and keep him alive. He'll be blessed on the earth. He won't deliver him to the will of his enemies. He will strengthen him on his bed of illness. You will sustain him on his sick bed. I said, Lord, be merciful to me. Heal my soul, for I have sinned against you. My enemies speak evil of me. When will he die and his name perish? And if he comes to see me, he speaks vain words. His heart gathers iniquity to itself. Where he goes out, he tells it. All these evil people are doing these terrible things, but then, what is it? Verse 10, You, O Lord, be merciful to me, and raise me up, that I may repay them. By this I know that you are well pleased with me, because my enemy does not triumph over me. And as for me, you uphold me in my integrity, and set me before your face forever. This is one who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. His delight is in the law of the Lord. On his law he meditates day and night. The situation is terrible, but it's going to be okay because God's looking after him. And that's the resolution of 41. Not every psalm in 1 to 41, in fact, probably not even a majority of psalms in 1 to 41 have the main theme of God's going to look after you if you're righteous. But that's kind of like the point of Psalms 1 through 41. That's kind of the point of that book. And so I don't even know how to quantify that. It doesn't really have a main point, but it kind of has a main point. Psalm 42 is, As the deer pants for the water brook, so my soul longs after you, O Lord. I want to see the Lord. I want to be with the Lord. I want to go to him. I want to know him. Psalm 72. New King James butchers poetry. I hate it. It's not my favorite. Not my favorite. Psalm 72 is about fearing God and looking to him, right? Psalm 42 is, I want to spend time with God. Psalm 72 is, Give the king your judgments, O God, your righteousness to the king's son. He'll judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. They'll fear you as long as the sun and the moon endure throughout all generations. God will deliver the needy when he cries, and the poor also, and him who has no helper. There will be an abundance of grain on the earth on the tops of the mountains. His name shall endure forever as long as the sun, and all these different good things. In many ways, Psalm 42 is David writing about how he wants to be near God. Psalm 72 is Solomon writing, according to the title, and it kind of seems like a glorification of the end of David. Even Psalm 72, the last verse of it is verse 20, where it says, The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. I mean, there are plenty of other Psalms in the rest of the book that talk about, David, or that have David as the writer. And so, again, these aren't chronological, but the point is, Psalm 42, David wants to be near God. Psalm 72 is Solomon calling God to be near the king, and then it ends with, and David's gone now, which is to say, David got what he wanted. He wanted to be near God, and now he gets to be near God. There are these weird connections that you can make through the Psalms, and the individual Psalm books make that point well, even if it's very understated, and so a lot of people miss that it's there, and a lot of people even laugh when I kind of propose that, yeah, I think there are some connections throughout, like, why Psalms are organized the way they are. Why are there 5 different books of Psalms? I don't necessarily know everything, but I do know there are some ties there, and it's interesting to consider. It should also be noted, one of my teachers one time pointed this out, that the majority of the balance on Psalms shifts as you go throughout the book. When you start with the first book of Psalms, 1 through 41, you have, like on a percentage basis, you have more sorrowful songs to joyous songs. Whereas when you get to the last book, Psalms 107 to 150, there's like 1, maybe 2 sorrowful songs in there, and the rest of it's just straight praise. I mean, most of the end of the book is praise, even though a lot of the beginning of the book is sorrow and lament. And so you do have a general movement in the Psalms as you go from sorrow and like sadness and bad things happening to a general just appreciation for God at the end of it, which may well mirror something. I don't exactly know. Is it like getting mature? Is it just how life goes when things are going poorly for you, but as you age up, you realize, it ultimately all works out okay, and I just want to praise God. Again, I don't exactly know why that's in there, but I do know it's part of the organization. There are no significant themes that separate them, but the first and last Psalms of each section can set the mood, and there's that general trend from sorrow to joy. Again, I don't have the second page of my PowerPoint up, so I'm just kind of winging it and then going on what I remember. If I desync from the PowerPoint, my bad. Hopefully both of them are helpful in their own ways. When you think about types of Psalms, we know like the vague organization. There is an organization. I don't know what all it is, but I do know that it exists. When you think about types of Psalms and individual types, there are a lot of individual types, and I don't have them all laid out here, but here are a few to get you started. You have laments, both corporate and individual. Corporate being in a group together with other people, and individual being by yourself. When you read through Psalms, you're going to find some laments. There are a lot of laments, or there are Psalms with elements of lament, or there are within Psalms, even within like Psalms of joy and thanksgiving, there will be a verse or two often where it says, this is terrible. Like, there have been some terrible things that happened, but it all worked out in the end. But there have still been some terrible things that happened. So you'll find laments scattered throughout. You'll find whole lament psalms, and you'll find just small sections in other psalms that are lament psalms. You have lament psalms for the group as a whole, and you have lament songs for individual people. You'll have to find those by yourself. I could rustle up a list somewhere, but you could also Google it and come up with the exact same list. So, like, I'm not going to bother. You have Thanksgiving Psalms. And again, those can be corporate. Those can be, everybody going to Thanksgive together. Or you have individual Thanksgiving Psalms of just like, I'm joyous in my heart, and so I will express that to God. You have praise Psalms. Praise is interesting because praise is typically not tied to present situations. These are, I need to write this down to clarify this point, actually. I'll be back in a second. When I say praise psalm, what we're talking about is a psalm that is praising God for existing or like some eternal aspect or attribute about him. It's not generally for whatever has happened to go well for you in the moment. Thanksgiving psalms a lot of times are like, you have saved me, therefore I will give you thanks. Or I will praise you because you saved me. But a lot of times praise is just like, God has always existed, and that's so cool. God has created everything. And that was a really long time ago. And that's so cool. Like, God is just pretty cool. And it doesn't really matter what your life is in the moment. You can praise God. So a lot of times praise psalms are not tied to present situations. They're just statements of how cool God is. And I misclicked again. You have history psalms. There are some psalms that are just like, And Israel walked through the desert for a long time. And also, we were kind of bad back then. But God was good, and now we're here. There are several of these psalms reciting the history of Israel. History is not always easy to remember. If you gave me a list of, for instance, American presidents, I'm an American. I have no idea. Like George Washington was number one, and then there were some other guys, and I know some of the ones that have happened in my lifetime. And that's about it, right? I've got random names, but I could never put them in order. I may be able to tell you what numbers the individual presidents are that I know, but like, what does it matter, right? What does that fit? It doesn't actually mean anything. I'm not that great at history. I can tell you every single monarch in England since William the Conqueror up until Elizabeth II because I know a song about it. And because I've that song is ingrained in my head. I can't even do that for my own people, but I know British history better than American history. That's kind of pathetic, but also they had some cool history. Part of the point of the history books of the Bible are to ingrain history in you so that you know, like Genesis and whatnot. But part of the point of history psalms in the Bible is psalms are easier to remember. Songs are just easier to memorize than writing stuff out is. And so they convert their history into music so that they can sing about their history, and it helps people remember. It's an interesting mnemonic device. A mnemonic device is something that's used to help your memory. There are celebration songs, songs about covenant, whether that's primarily covenant with God, but then you could apply that to something like a covenant with your spouse, and so maybe a marriage psalm could fit in there. There's things called royal songs or enthronement songs, which are typically sung when sung in praise of the king or sung when like coronating a king. And so if you're going through that ceremony, you might sing some of those. There are songs of Zion, which glorify Mount Zion is the hill that Jerusalem is built on. And so those are songs that glorify Jerusalem and the city God has provided for his people and kind of the land that he gave them back in that day for them to occupy. You also have Psalms of Trust. There are only a handful of these, but these are just people saying, God, I trust that you are going to work things out, and that's okay. And it's just an expression of people relying on God. There are also Psalms of Wisdom. There are very few of these that are specifically dedicated to it. Again, we have several other books in the Bible that are specifically dedicated to wisdom literature. We don't really have songs about wisdom very much, but they do exist. There are a few of them. And so there are Psalms that are just like, hey, here's some good advice. And again, you can have laments that are full lament psalms, but you can also have a regular psalm that has a couple of verses of lament in it. You can have a psalm that's entirely about history, or you can have a psalm that references one moment in history. You can have a psalm that's entirely wisdom, or you can have a psalm that just dispenses good life advice in it. Not all of these are, wisdom. There are not many straight up wisdom psalms that are just about wisdom. There are only a couple of them. But there are some wisdom sections in other psalms. And so keep that in mind. When you think about types of psalms, yes, there is an overarching type of psalm, but also within that psalm, it can have different components in it and mix and match and have them all come together. Imprecatory would be the other one that I would throw on here. People need to think about it. Imprecatory psalms are, again, kind of related to lament psalms, but where lament is like, man, that's a tough situation. Imprecatory is like, that's a tough situation. God, please do something about it. And those can be very different flavors of sorrowful psalms as you go through. Different types have different formats. Some of them have introductions, some of them don't. Some of them have formulae, some of them don't. Some of them specialize in repetition, some of them don't. There's a psalm that is very famous. I forget exactly which one it is. It's in the 100s somewhere. Because every other line of it is his loving kindness is everlasting, or like his mercies endure forever. So great is the Lord, his loving kindness is everlasting. Greatly to be praised, his loving kindness is everlasting. He rescued Israel from Egypt. His loving kindness is everlasting. He brought them through the Red Sea. His loving kindness is everlasting. He rescued them from Pharaoh. His loving kindness is everlasting. And it just goes back and forth, and it's just over and over and over again. Yeah, that is a particular type of psalm. That's a call and response kind of a psalm, where one leader will sing the main line, and then everyone else will echo back in chorus with his loving kindness is everlasting. Some psalms are built entirely around that repetition, whereas some psalms also are not at all built around that kind of repetition, but have one verse that could be easily repeated, and it seems to be a break verse. So a leader would sing 4 verses and then pause, and the audience would maybe repeat back to him the last verse or the last phrase that he just said. Different types of psalms are going to have different formats, and that will change the way you read them. Remember to just read them like they're songs, and try to imagine some music to fit with them, because it'll change your perspective on what they are. So I think this is the wrap-up slide. To wrap up, here's what you can take from Psalms. Psalms guide our worship. Psalms show us how to worship. They teach us what we should be thinking about. They show us good ways in which to think and good ways in which to express ourselves. Psalms can help guide our worship, especially our songs and our prayers that we're thinking about. If you find yourself struggling in not being able to pray properly or pray like you should, or you feel like it's not very effective, or you feel like you're not expressing yourself well, go read a psalm. It will help guide you in that, because the Psalms are very good, poetic expressions of what you're feeling. But a lot of times when I read a psalm personally, it's like, okay, yeah, I can see where that guy's coming from. And yes, I remember instances in my life where I felt like this. Or it is, man, I am feeling this right now. It's probably good for me to say it. And Psalms can be a good guide for our worship. Psalms also teach us to relate to God. They remind us that it's okay to relate to God. It's okay to be honest in front of God. God will not exile us if we are honest with Him. Sometimes life is tough. Sometimes things are not so happy. Sometimes nothing is going well. Psalms can teach us to express ourselves to God and let that be known. Psalms are great teachers in that way. So don't be afraid to express. Actually, go read a psalm. It'll show you some of those people are yelling at God, and God's okay with it. It's inspired scripture, so they help us to relate to God. Psalms also help us reflect or meditate on God, because they focus our thought process on different aspects of who God is. A praise psalm will help you meditate on why God is praiseworthy and what God is praiseworthy for. A thanksgiving psalm will help you meditate on what God has given you and see those things in your life. An imprecatory psalm will help you meditate on how God is going to judge, and that's okay. And I can give up my want for revenge because I know God's going to take care of it in the end. Reading Psalms help you to reflect on God. They help you to focus on different aspects of Him. And a lot of times they're aspects that we wouldn't normally think about in our own lives. So it's good for us to reflect and meditate upon God. Ultimately, you should be warned that Psalms do not guarantee you anything. When you read the Psalms, a lot of them are like, I will praise the Lord and then my life will get better. We have to be very careful on what we quantify as better, because better for a lot of these people, for David, who's running away when Saul is attacking him, or when Absalom's attacking him, or when his enemies are chasing him, or when the Philistines have almost found them, David is like stressed out of his mind. And then he says, I expressed that to God, and it's okay, and I'll leave it at that, and it'll be okay. I'll just give it to God, and then it'll work out. It doesn't mean that David's life got easier. It just means that he was aware that God was there and helping him. It doesn't mean that David got a cushy life or a fun one or something that was super enjoyable. It just means David was well aware that his life was not that enjoyable, and he said, God, I need help getting through this. And God did help him get through it. There were moments when he had opulence. There were moments when he was rich and famous. There were moments when everything was going well. But that's not because he prayed a psalm. That's because God is good in other ways. Just because you pray the Psalms, or just because you read a psalm and you understand where the writer's coming from, it doesn't mean your life is instantly going to get easier. And sometimes we can fall into that trap where we think Psalms might be a magic bullet to solve our problem. They're really not. They're something else. They're very helpful, but you can't just assume it's going to fix everything for you, because that's putting way too much in the power of a simple song. It is useful to have a psalm to remind you of who God is, and that there is someone who cares, and that there is someone who can and will help you. That's what the psalm is for. The psalm does not fix something, but it helps you remember God, and God can fix something. So, Don't get it twisted. Don't get it out of order. Don't put the cart before the horse or the psalm before your God. Pay attention to what the psalms are actually for. And that's where we'll leave it. Next time, it's just a little bit shorter than normal. 50 minutes being a little shorter is unfortunate but true. It is shorter than normal, and so we'll leave it there. Next week, we will jump on the idea of wisdom and go through the rest of wisdom literature, talk about some of the big differences in Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, because that's primarily where you find the rest of that. I will see you on, let's see, I'm recording this so out of order. I think the next step in the Sermon on the Mount is coming out on Friday, the Don't Judge section, so I think I will see you then.